It's now 6 o'clock. I'm reminded it's 6 o'clock, and the regular session of the Planning Commission of the City of Lancaster come to order. It's also game time at the Lakers tonight at 6 o'clock. I was reminded of that as well, in case anybody wants to know. Thank you all for being here on time. And do we have an invocator this evening? We do not. Well, we're going to stand and pray anyway.
You want me to do it?
Sure.
Bow your head. Lord, we meet to serve our community, to use our resources wisely and well, to represent all members of our community fairly, to make decisions that promote the common good. We recognize our responsibility to the past and the future, and the rights and needs of both individuals and community. As trusted servants, we seek blessings on our deliberations and on our efforts here today. May we act wisely and well. In your name, amen.
Thank you. Commissioner Smith, would you lead us in the pledge, please?
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Mayor, with the roll call, please.
Commissioners Diana Cook,
Present.
Cassandra Harvey,
Present.
Raj Molly, absent, Sandy Smith,
Here.
Fabian Tarciano,
Here.
Vice Chairman Randy Hall,
Here.
Chairman James Bose.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Our agenda tonight does not contain any action items. However, we will consider public business from the floor if anyone wishes to address us relative to the presentations tonight. We certainly will hear their remarks if they care to give any in advance of the presentations or at the conclusion thereof. So if anyone wishes to give testimony to the commission tonight, we'd appreciate it if you would fill out a speaker's card and give them to Mr. Ludicky so he can call you up when it's time. So our first action item, or our only action item, I should say, is approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of January 28, 2013. May I have a motion, please?
I move that we approve the minutes from the regular meeting of December 17th, 2012.
I'll second the motion.
13. February 25th, 2000. Oh, it's
Yeah, I'll second as stated.
What, can you give the date again?
So January 28, 2013?
yes, that date.
That one. Huh?
Do I
Okay. All right, let's get this out of the way. Have the Lakers scored yet? That's what I want to know. We don't know? That's what you're just concerned that who's scoring right. Why?
Oh, I can look.
Can you check on it for us from time to time and let us know what's going on?
Sure.
Thank you. All right, the motion is to approve the minutes of January 28, 2013. Do we have a second? Thank you, Fabian. Any further comment? Please vote.
Motion passes 5 to, what's an abstention?
One abstention.
Yeah, okay.
All right, thank you.
Oh, that's right, Commissioner Molly is not here.
All right, the first presentation tonight is the solar energy project. However, Ms. Swain is ill, I understand, so we will defer that to a future meeting, or did you want to make some comments?
No, she was putting together a pretty comprehensive presentation, including some really good photographs, and I think I would just wait for another time for her to give that presentation.
Okay. All right. Anyone have any comments regarding solar issues that we want to share with anyone? No? All right, then. So the next item is the master plan of trails and bikeways. Mr. Ludicky?
Okay, thank you, Chairman Vos and members of the Commission. As you will undoubtedly recall, we never did bring this before you for a formal presentation back about a year ago. The Council adopted the Master Plan of Trails and Bikeways actually in January of 2012, and it was the Architectural and Design Planning Commission that had the primary responsibility for the oversight of the development of this plan. However, because a lot of what we're doing in terms of creating development codes and rethinking the way we look at development proposals are affected by this plan, I thought it would be a good opportunity for us to go over what's in it and the types of things that that plan calls for, as well as some of the things that you're beginning to see out in the community that are being done in accordance with that plan. And you know, as representatives of the city out in the community, I'm sure you get questions periodically about why this or that has happened. And, you know, we'll have the opportunity, hopefully, to address some of that. And you have with us, you have in front of you right here 3 people that were really key staff members in terms of creating that. Elma Watson, assistant planner, who was actually the project manager on it. Michelle Cantrell, who as a city engineer had a great deal of input on the planning, particularly for bicycle facilities and how those are accommodated on our roadways. And of course I had involvement in part of the oversight in seeing how that folds into other development codes and requirements that we're looking at. When we did the plan, one of the key components of it was the public outreach component, and we did a fairly extensive job in terms of doing that. We conducted community meetings. We had a group of we had a technical advisory committee, and we got as much input from people as we could. And some of the things that you see here, in particular right here, I can't remember if any of you were involved, but we had Dan Burden, very renowned expert on walkable communities, came in and helped conduct walk audits for a couple of days, where we took a look at various areas in the community, one on the west side near the college, one in the central part of the city near 10th West and Avenue I, and one out in the vicinity of 20th Street East and Avenue J. And we looked at what were some of the barriers to walkability, what were some of the things that might change over the long term that would help make the city more walkable. We also tried to introduce to people things that they might see coming as a part of this effort. One of my favorites happens to be this one right here, where due to some really great work from our public works staff, we were able to create a roundabout, a model of a roundabout at a community meeting at Mariposa School, and people kind of were able to get used to how that would function. And yes, they had to walk through it and act as they would if they were driving or walking or whatever the case may be. And as you've probably seen recently in the newspapers, the first roundabout the city's looking at installing is actually going to be at Avenue L and Challenger Way, and part of the reason that that is being put in at that location is to address some really safety concerns that we have with accident rates and other things that have occurred at that location. When we did our plan, we based it on 4 pillars, the 4 things that we think are important as we go forward as a city, and those are safety, health, economic vitality, and sustainability. And all of those things are addressed or are touched upon in the Master Plan of Trails and Bikeways. Safety, it doesn't take, if you've been in the community for any length of time, you know, the number of pedestrian injuries and deaths over a period of time and the amount of speeding that happens within this community is pretty well known. And I think one of the things that people often do not understand is that improvements that we make that allow streets and areas to be better for pedestrians and bicyclists are also important in improving safety for motorists. The safety, the plan devices with high crash reduction factors, we're looking at things that really kind of help reduce the overall incidence of things happening in our community that we don't like. Certainly, if you have more people walking or bicycling, there's greater safety in numbers. We've seen that in our downtown area. The more eyes that you get on the street that are either people walking or bicycling, it actually makes areas safer from a crime and other standpoint, because you have people that are kind of, they're essentially people surveying or having surveillance on those areas. Health. One of the reasons, unfortunately, that we were able to get the grant to do the Master Plan of Trails and Bikeways is that the Antelope Valley in general does not score well on a lot of health factors. Rates of obesity, rates of diabetes, rates of death from, early death from, various ailments that could be, positively influenced by more exercise, really are necessary in our community. And this plan helps to provide those opportunities for physical activity, reducing the risk of chronic disease, and providing a better quality of life for our residents. And children's health is particularly important. We want to look at ways to encourage walking and bicycling to school. One of the things that we recently became aware of is a study out of Denmark. We've known for a long time, obviously, that people who walk and bike and kids who walk and bike tend to be in better physical shape than their classmates. But the study out of Denmark has shown that if a child walks or bikes regularly to school, they're usually about 6 months ahead of their peers in the class academically. And the reason that the researchers believe that happens is that that physical activity in the morning actually gets them more prepared and their brains more prepared to deal with the functions of the day. So this is something that, we've known the health risks or health links for a while. We're now beginning to see that there may be a link between the academic performance and more physical exercise. Economic vitality. The best example we've got of this is that when we redid the street in the downtown area, the value of that property changed. It went up. It became valuable for things other than what it was being used for. And one of the things that we really learned out of this process is that if the city is going to make infrastructure investments, they really ought to be investments that make the property adjacent to it more valuable, increase the value of that property. And in many ways, what we've done in the past doesn't necessarily do that. The best examples, of course, are freeways kind of cut through existing areas. They don't necessarily improve the value of property that's along it. But if you do streets properly and you do trails and other kinds of things properly, they can bring a definite economic benefit to the properties that are adjacent to that improvement. And of course, this happens to be a picture of one of the boulevard events. These kinds of things were never really possible or pursued before the redesign of the street in the downtown area. Once it became a place that was usable as a gathering place and people began to recognize it as that, things like this began to occur. Farmers market, same kind of thing. So there are lessons that we've learned from this that may well be transferable to other parts of our community. And sustainability is kind of the same thing. When you look at people who are able to walk destinations or don't have to drive everywhere they go, you get a more sustainable type of approach to your community than you would otherwise have. We had several goals, policies, and actions in the master plan. As far as goals, and one of the things that we're really looking at is safe, connected, and convenient street environment, and that's a very important thing as we look to the future development of our subdivision ordinance and other kinds of things. One of the things that we want to make sure that we're able to do is create a very connected community, and in some cases we have not done that in the past, and we need to go back and make sure that that sort of thing is happening. Other things like off-street shared use paths are a part of the plan, amenities and facilities for bicyclists, encouraging community and supporting the program that we call Destination Lancaster, which is looking to try to draw people from outside the area who may want to just experience the environment that we have in our downtown or other locations. The plan within, or the bicycle plan in the master plan of trails contains 40 miles of Class 1 bike paths. We'll go over what those are in a little bit, 137 miles of Class 2, and 37 miles of Class 3 bike routes. In Class 1, these are what you typically see as separated, dedicated types of bicycle paths. This one happening to be along a drainage course within the Los Angeles area, and if you look, for instance, along Sierra Highway, we have one of those in place. Class 2, the most common one that we see in our community, which is an on-street bike lane. It's dedicated. It's not a shared travel route in the sense that you have in the downtown area, but you actually have a dedicated lane that's provided for the bicyclist. In Class 3, where you have a bike route that's signed, and you might have an enhancement to make motorists more aware that this is also an area for bicyclists, and you see that Sharrow kind of marking in the downtown area right now. Some of the more recent improvements that we've put in, these happen to be ones on 25th Street West, the buffered bike lane that was put in the last few months behind the Valley Central Shopping Center, where we took out a travel lane in each direction and replaced that with a buffered bike lane. And, you know, I had a person tell me, well, I never saw anyone ride a bicycle on there. Well, yeah, because it was mainly travel lanes that were there. But I have started to see people riding in that area with the, you know, the installation of this. And what we're also seeing is that we get a little bit slower vehicle speed and a little bit more safe environment for the motorist. And then on Valley Central Way, the colored bike lanes, which provide a higher level of visibility. And you know, if you have some particular questions about this, one of the reasons that we looked at doing this particular improvement was to not only provide an opportunity for people who may want to use bicycles in this area, but was to try to deal with some safety issues that we had with traffic along that street and a collision rate that was relatively high. Now, as I said, bike lanes provide benefits to a wide range of people, and reducing motorist collision is one of them. One of the other things that we're looking at is in our more rural areas or our undeveloped portions of the city, widening shoulders so that people who are biking have that shoulder available to ride on, or in the case of off-street paths and things of that type, so that they have an option other than riding in the travel lane on high-speed rural roads. The trails plan, we're looking at both equestrian and pedestrian trails, some multi-use paths, what we call jogging loops, and we're looking at potential locations for trailheads for these trails also within the plan. And, you know, there's obviously some recreational and other benefits to trails. This is an example of one kind of off-street trail you could have. You might have a more improved one, particularly if it's a multi-use kind of path, such as the one you see here, as well as amenities and other things. This one I think is really neat because it looks like they have an area for the dog, you know, to get a drink too, along with the person walking them. And, you know, in some communities you see these kinds of things where you have both a walking path and maybe an equestrian path that's a part of this. And equestrian paths may be somewhat developed, or they may be more like this, where it's a route that people have the right to ride on. And this, in many cases, works just fine for equestrians, and they were an important part of our outreach effort also. And once again, you know, another example of this kind of trail approach. We're looking particularly on the west side at some jogging loops, and those we expect would be a combination of earthen paths and maybe rubberized sidewalks, where you get the ability for people who are joggers to not always have to be pounding on you know, hard concrete, but looking for things that will have a little more give or a little more friendliness to it. And as we develop projects out in some of those west side areas, we expect to complete some of these jogging loops and these approaches. And then the pedestrian plan, we're looking at ways to make areas safer for pedestrians. And that includes not only things at intersections, but completion of sidewalk links and other things of that type. Where we can slow traffic speeds, we'll look to do that. Where we can adjust radiuses of curbs to make people have to slow down to make the turns, we'll look at that also. And here's some of the examples that are out of the plan as far as trying to provide a better pedestrian environment. You see this one happened to be right at the freeway off-ramp at K. And you see the way that this can be done here to provide a better crossing environment for people. The idea of a refuge area, if people can't make the entire road in one light cycle, at least they have a relatively safe refuge area that they can wait till the next cycle is available. Another example here where you want to try to get situations so that people can cross in ways that they are at right angles to the traffic flow and can get a little more visibility. And although Michelle's far better at explaining this than I am, you try to put in markings and other kinds of warnings so that drivers are aware that they are approaching an area where there may be a pedestrian or someone crossing. This one happens to be at the Avenue L overpass over Sierra Highway, and you see some of the ways in which some of that can be dealt with. So these are some of the examples that we also have in the plan. And then finally, the plan also contains what's known as an ADA transition plan, which seeks to deal with some of the barriers to ADA access within the community. And we have identified as a part of the plan areas where bus stops, ramps, missing sidewalks, and a process for our own self-evaluation can occur. And actually we're starting to take that, I think, another step forward. There's some additional funding that we're looking at to do a more involved plan and more thorough plan in dealing with ADA access. And these are some of the examples. If you go to certain places in town, if your disabled access gets a little difficult in some places, especially where you have the ramps and things without a lot of distance in them, as a result of past improvements or obstacles that make it difficult to get past certain areas. That's not the greatest picture, but that's near, I think, one of our bus stops, and it's not always easy. One of the things that really, personally, I noticed, because I went on the walk audit near 30th Street West and Avenue K at the college, is that if you need to push a button and you're in a wheelchair, that's not an easy move given where the light pole is and other things. So as we design new intersections or look at the ability to retrofit existing ones, those are the kinds of things that we have to take a look at. Funding, one of the big questions that we had was, where does funding come from? We always felt that once we got the plan in place, that funding would be a lot easier to obtain. So far, so good. We've managed to successfully look at getting funding through the bicycle transportation account. We have opportunities through recreational trails grants programs and things of that type. One of the key things that agencies that give grants out look towards is, do you have an overall plan in place? Have you comprehensively thought about how this money is going to be used? And what's your track record of success? And we as a city are building that, I think, pretty effectively right now. So as time goes by, I think we're going to compete even more successfully for funding, especially going back and trying to retrofit some of the areas that we have. Overall, the plan, it's no longer a draft, although that says draft. It does fulfill a general plan directive, which was to develop a master plan of trails and bikeways. It is a plan that's going to be implemented on an incremental basis. I mean, it's no secret that the city doesn't have the money right now to go out and install everything as much as we would like that to happen. But it does allow us to apply for new types of funding that wasn't available to us before. And we believe that ultimately it will be a much healthier, more livable and active city as a result of this. And there is a definite link between cities that accommodate and encourage biking and walking, and not only the health of the residents, but the value that exists in the properties and those areas in those cities. So that's kind of an overview of it. I know it's probably somewhat quick. But any questions and comments, and we'd be happy to try to respond to them or answer things that you may have heard from the community.
There may be some. Thank you.
Okay.
Anyone?
I have a couple. This roundabout on L and 10th East, is that going to go clockwise or counterclockwise?
Whenever you enter a roundabout, you always go to your right, so you would be going counterclockwise.
So if you were going south on Challenger and you wanted to turn to the right on L, you have to go around it?
You wouldn't go around it. I mean, you would enter the roundabout for a slight few seconds and then make your right turn.
But you wouldn't make the whole 360-degree turn?
No, you would not. You could immediately exit the roundabout after entering it to make your right turn.
And then Brian said that when the city makes investments, it makes the property next door to it more valuable. That's always the number one bugaboo that I hear is somebody says, so-and-so got enriched because the city did this and so-and-so did that, and I would like to have something that I could say back. And this Master Trails is a good example. Downtown's a good example. If you have any other examples that would, because that's number one thing. Somebody always comes up to you. So-and-so's property's right next door to that, and that's.
Yeah, I think what we're kind of looking at too is there are ways to unfortunately improve streets or roadways that don't necessarily bring value to the property adjacent to them. It may bring other mobility benefits, but what we're looking at is that if the city makes an investment in infrastructure, it ought to register positively to the properties right along where that infrastructure investment is made, as well as any other gains that you get from mobility or access. And that's one of the things that we're trying to look at more closely. For example, we've had over the years a lot of people who, particularly if they have residential units or even some commercial, if the city in the past has come in and widened a roadway, they may not have added value to the property along it. They may have actually decreased it because now you get a much faster roadway or difficulty in people being able to access it because the city now restricts driveway accessibility or things of that type. So there are still going to be situations where that has to occur because of traffic flow and other things, but I think as a city staff, we're going to be a lot more conscientious when those improvements are discussed and looked at to make sure that whatever the greater benefit is, isn't necessarily happening only at the expense of maybe an adjacent property owner, because I think all of us can point to situations where that's occurred also.
So rather than a street section that's 137 feet in width on one side of the intersection and 84 on the other, consistency oftentimes gets thrown under the bus because of, in my point of view, because of the perception at the time that more right-of-way is better. And it isn't necessarily so, and I think we've proved it to ourselves. We have situations in our community where the development required those in my point of view, excessive rights of way that ultimately will never connect to a like right of way on the other side of the intersection. It just won't happen, hasn't happened, and will not happen. So you end up taking value out of property that could be generating tax increment or some other revenue source to the municipality.
Yeah, that's certainly a valid point. And of course, from the city standpoint, there's no benefit to requiring more right-of-way than you need to really accommodate flow, because ultimately we have the maintenance costs for that. And your point is well taken. If you take property away that's really doing nothing but sitting in, a street right-of-way that you don't need, then there's other losses that are occurring. I still think one of the best examples, for instance, downtown, street right-of-way that was really being used for nothing but to move cars at 50 miles an hour now actually is parking that's in the center of the Ramblas, and that provides definitely some kind of value to the properties that are along it. There's now parking and availability that wasn't there before, and we didn't have to provide more off-street parking to meet that goal. So it's an example of, street right-of-way. The street right-of-way is still there, but it's being put to a different purpose that's more beneficial to what the uses are that are along it, as opposed to what was there previously.
Yeah, the advantage of widening and increasing speed isn't necessarily to the benefit of the government that imposed the condition. The slower you move traffic, the more opportunity to the buyer and to the reseller, if you will. But there's there's studies all over the planet, and folks make those decisions on master plans for streets and widths and speeds and all that stuff with very good intentions. I mean, those decisions aren't made in a vacuum. I mean, they're made with a lot of study and a lot of forethought. It was interesting you pointed out and I don't recall the term, where the pedestrian has an opportunity to be in a safe zone while they're crossing the thoroughfare, the K and the freeway exit intersection particularly, and that's I don't know what the collision rate is at that intersection, but the vehicular movement at very high speeds there. It's a very challenging exiting and a very challenging traffic movement there. It triggered, any thought of using bollards similar to what is used in other countries, Great Britain, for instance, and lighted bollards that tend to flash with at the pedestrian crossings. Although in those locations, in those downtown locations, it tends, where you get a lot of pedestrian traffic. That's the reason they have them. But in California, that's just a target, right? A bollard is just a target. It's kind of like a power pole on the side of the road. It's a target for somebody to run into, I guess. Anyway, it was very interesting.
Brian, I'm curious, with all the improvement we did on Lancaster Boulevard, and you talk about
I don't have any statistics specifically on that, but I can tell you what we've heard anecdotally. And what I'm hearing anecdotally is that that neighborhood, particularly to the south of downtown, now appears to be a place where you're getting younger couples that are looking to buy if they want the environment that's been created along Lancaster Boulevard. We know a lot better what's happened on the boulevard itself. Revenue is up about 96% since the street improvement was done. Michelle, I think, probably has better statistics on what's happened to the rate of vehicle collisions and the severity on the boulevard. And we've had a lot more business activity that's begun to occur downtown because the environment created is a place that's now attractive versus a place that was scary before with, traffic moving at a high rate of speed. I didn't know if you had the...
We did take a look at the collisions that have occurred on the boulevard both before and after its transformation, and we've experienced 50% less collisions occurring at the intersections and along the mid-block as well, and an 80 to 90% reduction in injury-related collisions, which is a great number.
Well, that's terrific. Folks are, and there's still folks that don't understand what 15 miles an hour is, but they're learning. What's that? Or how to make a turn, yeah. Well, what about the, do you have statistics relative to the pedestrian injuries, or were there ever any?
I don't recall how many there were before the transformation, but I do know that after the transformation, we have not had any pedestrian or bicycle collisions.
So some of the concerns that were raised prior to the installation of the improvements, folks concerned about the interaction of pedestrians with vehicles and that sort of thing. It's kind of like the fear of the roundabout. My guess is that it'll be very successful and a benefit to the traffic movement out on the Ellen Challenger intersection, and my guess is you probably have some plans for other potential locations as well.
Yes, the roundabout at Ellen Challenger, its primary purpose is to improve safety. We actually received funding through a highway safety improvement program grant to fund that particular intersection because of the high rate of collisions we had there. And we, just this last year, actually received 2 more grants for 2 more roundabouts, both on Lancaster Boulevard, one at 15th Street West and the other at 15th Street East.
15th West and 15th East?
Yes.
Great. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question. I know we talked about widening roads, but when you take these roads and you put them on a road diet like on 25th Street West and Valley Central Way, did they simultaneously also decrease the speed limit, or did they leave them the same on those 2 particular examples?
Those improvements have now only been in for a couple months, but actually this month we're collecting data. We're collecting speed surveys as well as traffic counts, and we're going to take a look at our collision data. We just haven't put that together just yet and compared before and after, but we will shortly. The hope is that we do definitely have a decrease in the speeds as well as the number of collisions we were experiencing.
Yeah, you figured the 2 would go hand in hand, make them a little bit smaller, kind of decrease the flow a little bit and speed accordingly.
Yeah, and the contrasting paint, the green paint, sensitizes the driver to the potential danger of, or sharing, I should say, not danger, but the sharing of the roadway with bicyclists, rather than just the plain striping, if you will.
Correct. The green is meant to draw attention to that bike lane and bring it to the attention of the vehicles, or the drivers of the vehicles, that they're sharing the roadway with bikes.
Better than signage, I would think.
Yeah, it definitely stands out better than signage.
I noticed on some of the examples it looked like some of the off-street improvements, those little asphalt, what I typically, the way I see them are safe paths to school rights-of-way issues and paths that you'd potentially share with bicyclists as well. They're wide enough to do that, so you'd have pedestrians and bicyclists sharing the same path.
Yes, some of the multi-purpose pathways, they're designed to both accommodate bicycles and
And
pedestrians.
keep the bicyclists off the narrower streets and out of harm's way a little bit, huh?
Yep, yes.
Cool, great.
I just had one quick
Go
question, if
ahead,
you don't mind.
sure.
And maybe you included that. From a funding perspective, and just so that I'm hearing this correctly, we're positioning ourselves a little bit better once we have the statistics saying that we're getting better, so 50% reduction in crashes and that sort of thing, to secure more grant money. Is what that essentially does?
Yes, and also having a plan that was developed by the community and accepted by the city, and that really goes a long way to helping us obtain that funding as well, because it's showing that we're really, making plans to make those improvements and not just.
I guess I was just curious to see what would make us eligible for the money over another community, if it would, more so the statistics based on what we've done thus far, or if it's just the fact that we have a plan. I think because any city could have a plan, but based on what you've done thus far and some of the wins, if you will, being safer by 50%, oh, by the way, that type of thing. Is that?
Yeah, I think if we can show that we've been successful, that definitely helps our ability to obtain funding.
And I just had one additional question, and it's not that I don't know how to drive. I just learned how to drive a couple weeks ago, got my license. Just kidding. I think it's great that we have the color, the green that stands out. I know I certainly needed it when I first saw it, but I don't think some of our citizens actually still know how to react when I've been behind cars that perhaps have just noticed the difference, and they slow down. I get that, and we want them to slow down, but I don't think some of them are sure that they could actually drive into that lane. They're not, when there's not a cyclist there. So is there something that we've communicated, like leaflets or something that says you're going to start seeing this around our community? This is kind of a how-to? Just a thought. I mean...
No, I think it's a good one. I've had more questions about kind of the colored bike lanes, and then they see the brakes in it, and the idea, of course, is that that's the place where you can swing out and into the driveway, and part of that goal is to make sure that people have a way, kind of a refuge out of the traffic lane to make the turn and stop, because part of what we had occurring on the street was people rear-ending other people while they slowed down to make turns into the driveway. But I've seen confusion in the buffered bike lane on 25th too, where I think part of it is force of habit. People are used to swinging wider or make the turn, or they haven't been down the street in 3 months, and suddenly they're like, oh no, what is this? I don't understand where I'm at, and then they swing back this way and swing back that way. But yeah, I think that's a valid point. People have asked the question, and maybe we ought to get that word out a little more about what it means. But what I've told people is the green bike lane doesn't mean anything different than a green bike lane or than a bike lane normally would, but it's designed to be a lot more visible in terms of where you have a lot of turning movements or other things happening.
Thank you. So you think over time folks will learn, I guess. It's kind of like the transition eastbound on Lancaster Boulevard as you cross into 10th Street West. The mandatory right turn, a through lane, and a left turn lane. And it's on a curve. It's on a curvilinear sort of configuration because that's the way the street configuration is. Could it have been striped further down? Could the transition throat been longer? I don't know. Would it have helped? Probably not, because folks just don't pay attention until it's on them, and then I don't want to turn right, and they're you get the fender bender because they're all of a sudden wanting to transition into a lane where they don't have room. So you learn over time, and as people drive the streets, they will It's like taking Avenue J from the east side to the west side. Well, it depends on how far east you started and how far west you want to go. And do you have 25 minutes? Well, there's nothing wrong with that, particularly if it lowers the accident rate, the damage to public and private property. So it takes you 6 seconds longer. I mean, what's the big deal? If you're, but if you're 19 and you want to get there yesterday, well, we all were there. All right, well, thank you. Anything further?
Yes, for the record, I have been driving longer than 2 weeks with a license, just so we're clear.
What was the score? No, the score. And before we go to the next report. 102 to 6? No.
43 to 31.
What was it?
43 to 31.
And who's ahead?
Nuggets.
Well, we'll leave it at that. All right. So we have another report on the transit-oriented development overlay zone.
Chris Ani, our assistant planner, will give this report.
Good evening.
Good evening, Chair Vos and Commissioners.
How's the wrist healing up?
Let's see if I can figure this one out. Is this one before?
Can you write a check, Chris? Okay.
I think so.
You all right? Good.
Let's see. Here we go. Okay, basically the Lancaster Transit-Oriented Development Overlay Zone. These three photos right here show you kind of some of the elements that we're talking about in terms of what we're looking at in the TOD development projects. As you can see, we have very transit-oriented development in terms of very pedestrian, lots of landscaping, outdoor activities. Like Chair Vos was talking about, increasing pedestrian safety. We're looking at, in the right photo, we have the curbs that actually are extended so that it decreases the distance that the pedestrians have to walk, and of course reduces the speed of the cars coming through that area as well. Basically, TOD projects, their intent is to encourage people to use more mass transit and encourage them to walk. That's pretty much what this is all about. Let's see, the same elements can be seen as you see with the boulevard. I mean, we have the same kind of things going on. All the landscaping, the improvements to the buildings, the facades, the outdoor dining, the bike lanes, just, again, a place where people want to go, people want to hang out. And these are the kind of developments we want to see continuing in these other areas. Let's see. Basically, this whole thing started last year when there was a request for a proposal from Metro to do a TOD project overlay, and basically we felt that would be a great opportunity for us to take advantage of some of the other areas that weren't involved with the past projects and include those in those, and actually hopefully to attract and manage growth in those underdeserved areas there. And basically, we were able to, we were excited that we were able to actually win the grant, and that was in April. And we do have a consultant on board right now, David, Town Sergeant Planning, and we already did have a kickoff meeting, and that was January 15th. And that was what was discussed is the next steps, the different process that we're going to be going through, and the scope of work. And basically, I'll go over some of the recent things that we've been working on, actually since 2001. Since 2001, we do have the transit district there, and that's in the black area. Pretty much it's roughly about a quarter mile away from the Metrolink station. And the next one that we went through was the North Downtown Transit Village. That's in actually the blue there. That was done in 2003. And let's see, the downtown specific plan I guess it's kind of like a pinkish color, purplish color. That was 2006. 2008, we worked on the South Downtown concept plan, and the revitalization of the boulevard actually happened in 2010. So that's kind of all the things that we've been working on up until now. And actually, the area in the green was the one that was just completed last year, and that's the Southeast Transit Village Plan area. Let's see. And so with all those two areas, again, we just want to make sure that we're going to include areas to the northeast and the southwest that just weren't included in the recent plans. We want to get some design guidelines and some language in there to kind of mold the future development of that area there. Let's see. So looking at planning area 1, it's basically in between Avenue I, Milling, Division, and Sierra Highway. And kind of the photo on the top there kind of explains, basically this area is mostly filled with some older industrial, a lot of older houses. There's some pretty nice older houses there on Lancaster Boulevard. And what we're thinking is this area could really transform. I mean, there's the Yucca corridor is mostly commercial, which kind of moves down into the Southeast Transit Village. And we're thinking with the photo on the bottom that, you can develop, this would be more of the TOD developments that we're thinking of, where you have the residential on top, the commercial below, and kind of a nice area in the corner there where you can have, public get-togethers and just hang out in the corner in some green space. So that's kind of what we're looking at in that area. And actually that area, most of the houses are pretty much only 1% are actually homeowner or owner occupied. And let's see. So area 2, which is the southwest area, south of the boulevard pretty much, roughly between Fern and Sierra Highway, we're looking at extending the boundary to the other side of Fern to include both sides there. And when you look at this area, basically from Sierra Highway, you have a lot of automotive uses and pawn shops and whatnot. And then it kind of transitions over to on Beach, where you have more apartments. And then pretty much throughout this area, it's single-family residences, and a lot of them do have the second units in the back. And there's actually a lot of opportunity for these areas to kind of increase the density. A lot of people that live in actually the R7000 zone want to do second dwelling units. At this time, they're not allowed to. So we're looking on how to transform this area without, in terms of keeping the character of some of these older areas. Some of these houses you have that were built in the 1920s, so you don't want to have like a small 1920s house and then like a big mansion next to it or a huge apartment box building. We want to make sure we're sensitive in this area and make sure that character, some of the character still remains there. Just an example, we have a corner there at, I believe that's Fern and New Grove. So again, it's just the types of infill development we're talking about. 2-story buildings, you could have that building in the front and another one in the back, and kind of keeping it looking more like single family, but still have a multifamily type use that could be allowed in some of these areas. Let's see. And the one thing we're looking at, of course, is the success of the boulevard could actually be pulled down into this area, because we see the same things happening on the boulevard, that some of the multifamily houses and whatnot. A lot of these people that live here, some people have lived here 20, 30 years, and they were kind of worried what was going to happen on the boulevard. And I live in this area actually, and I talked to the neighbors, and they're actually really excited about seeing what's happening. And it's interesting to hear what they have to say in terms of what they're concerned with in terms of what could happen in their area as well. And some of the new people that are moving in, when I talk to them walking the dog or walking to the boulevard like I always do, is they move here to this area because of the amenities that they're taking advantage of from the boulevard. So that's the reason why I think this area is really transforming, and I think it's only going to get better. Let's see. So the Southeast Transit Village area, basically there's a lot of open space, of vacant land here, And again, with a lot of older industrial uses, automotive uses, the biggest challenge here probably is the fact that there's so many lots that are so narrow. I think a lot of them are only 25 feet wide. So there's a lot of different challenges for this area. But as you can see here, this photo on top is of Yucca. And what we're thinking, what could possibly happen is you can have the extension of the boulevard design, as you see on the bottom photo, where again you have the bike lanes, the extended sidewalks, all the street furniture. Again, engaging kind of the outdoor activity and just pretty much making a place where people want to go. And there's several this whole process involves pretty much changing a whole bunch of documents. And basically we're looking at updating the general plan, updating the maps, the general plan map, the land use map, and we have the boundary right now at the Transit Village boundary at the quarter mile, but we're looking at extending it probably most likely to a half mile around the Metrolink station. And again, we're creating the new TOD overlay zone, updating Title 17 zoning, and that's to include the TOD overlay, which will include the regulations and the new design standards. And with all these documents that are going to be revised, we're looking to provide the framework that puts this in place for the new investment and revitalization that will, again, continue what's already happening with the boulevard, and hopefully promoting investment and more development. Let's see. And some of the next steps is right now staff is working on putting together a steering committee, and we're going to be having multiple public workshops. There's going to be one in June and most likely one in August. And for now, what we're looking at from the consultant is probably in March getting a market assessment report from them, transportation review. In April, having internal workshops, and then in May, looking at some conceptual TOD pattern diagrams. Like I said, in June, we're going to have the workshop. And in July, we're going to start looking at some of the draft documents they put together in terms of the regulating plan, the goals and objectives, development requirements, and the general plan changes. In August, we'll be looking at the other workshop, and September, October will pretty much be in the review process of all the draft documents. And most likely, probably by November, the Planning Commission will be asked through the public hearing process again to review the final plan and make a recommendation that will go to the City Council for their consideration. And the anticipated outcomes, basically, the whole idea of this is through the overlay zone plan is to come up with development standards and design guidelines that will be proposed in order to manage the future growth and development. And the documents, we want to make them simple and provide developers both textually and visually with the design guidelines, a clear understanding what community vision is, and basically the development standards and design guidelines we hope to be able to expedite the entitlement process as well, and that should help all of us involved. And that concludes my presentation, and I'm available for any questions.
Very good, thank you. I'm sure there are comments. Go ahead.
Can you talk about the steering committee that you're putting together? Who will be the members of the steering committee? Are you including the business owners?
There's going to be some business owners, a member from the ADC, some people that live in the neighborhood, probably some church members as well.
Okay, good to hear. Thanks.
Did you say that the area around Lancaster Boulevard is 1% owner-occupied?
Yeah, some of the residents there, or some of the houses that are there are only 1% owner-occupied.
And how many owners is it? Just
I don't have the number completely, but it's mostly in that. Yeah, I don't have all those numbers yet. I'm not sure how many.
is it that area that's
It's pretty much the
east of
area.
Yucca?
I'll show you real quick. see most of the houses are on the northwest corner, actually moving down towards Sierra Highway as well. But mostly that whole area, the study was showing that it's only 1% owner occupied. So.
Anyone else have any comments or questions? Very good. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Appreciate your report.
Thank you.
All right, then. That concludes the reports for this evening, Mr. Ludicky.
Yes, it does.
All right, thank you.
We'll hope to reschedule the solar presentation for another one of your meetings.
I did want to mention, and I had occasion to be out on the farther west side, and I drove the perimeter of and I can't remember the name of the developer that developed the solar project around 97th and north and south of I.
Yeah, I think that's Recurrent Energy that did that project.
At any rate, because I was interested in the shrubbery, the landscaping, and how it would survive the freeze we had and so forth. And like most landscaping, there was some damage from what appeared to me to either be lack of water or freeze, or maybe both. I just wonder what provision, if any, we've considered in our conditions of approval to maintain, to replant, to rejuvenate, whatever you want to call it, the landscaping, particularly when it's young like that, and to deal with it early on rather than later, if there's some provisions for that. And some of the majority of it, I mean, probably 90+% is thriving, but there's who knows if it was vandalism or what. I mean, I think it needs some attention, but I don't know that we have worked into the system a provision for that.
Well, there's a general requirement for all conditional use permit approvals that landscape materials have to be maintained in perpetuity. In the case of Recurrent, I believe they have other projects that they are working with us on, so I will make sure that they're aware of what's happening there, because as we've told, well, whether the solar project developers or others, certainly track record is a consideration when they look at additional projects. And this is one we are looking at pretty closely. It's the first real one that's been developed, and certainly we want it to put forth a good view for us.
Yeah, notice the one off of 90th West and K8 to K12 is under construction. Just recently started, I guess, and probably within the last 30 days, looks like. So there is certainly some activity on the solar projects on the west side, if you go to the west side of those facilities where the tamarack trees are, and that act as the wind barrier and the tumbleweed catchers, it's quite dramatic. So they have some challenges ahead of them, I'm sure, to deal with that. But couldn't see any of the installed landscaping because they tended to be covered by a recent infestation of tumbleweeds. So it's going to be an ongoing issue. Well, thank you for the reports tonight. Do you have any announcements you'd like to share with us?
No, other than to let you know the residential zones, which you made the recommendation on as a commission back in January. Is it January? Yes, January. Those are not going to go tomorrow. They will go to the City Council meeting on March, I think it's the 12th. So the first council meeting in March is when we expect that to go. Tomorrow, at the city council meeting, the solar energy project that is near 40th Street East and Lancaster Boulevard is in front of the council for general plan amendment and zone change consideration.
All right. Very good, thank you. What do we have to look forward to in our March meeting?
Well, that's we do have a restaurant with an alcohol permit request through a CUP. That's the reuse of the former Shakey's down on Avenue I, which should be in front of you. If that's the only case, then it might be a good opportunity for the solar presentation if you are so willing as a commission. But we'll take a closer look at it.
All right, very good. Thank you. All right, anything from the commission?
I have a couple of things.
Go ahead.
One, are we going to be doing industrial theater like we did the Bamboo Club, or is it just one?
Thank you for bringing that up.
At this point, we don't have any real feedback from the sheriff's department as to whether this was some kind of pattern. Usually, we take a look at whether there's a pattern of issues at a particular place where CUP has been granted. So I'm really not in a position to tell you whether we're going to want to take any action on that one or not at this point. We'll need a little more information.
Mean question, but how many shootings does a pattern make?
Yeah, that's a good point. But we usually look for things if there is some kind of evidence that whoever is operating the venue, there's been other kinds of problems or other kinds of issues. Isolated incidents, while dramatic, we tend to be a little bit. We tend not to react to them immediately, tending to look more at whether there's a pattern of issue or something like that. So, we'll take a look at this one. We'll look at what the sheriff's reports are and see if there's some kind of thing that really demands, some kind of revocation concern, or maybe it's simply a matter of how this particular use operated in this case. My understanding is that this came as a result of a rental rather than the operation of the normal business itself. So that may be something that we'll need to take a look at.
Well, I thought, according to the CUP, that the people that were rented out, the property manager was supposed to be responsible still.
Yes, they do bear that responsibility. But like I said, we'll take a look from a staff standpoint at what the information is and the facts are, and see how that relates to the operation of the facility itself.
My last point is, I don't know if it's just me, it's anecdotal, but it seems like every time I drive through town, I see at least one or two people run red lights, and usually at fairly high rates of speed. And it's gotten to the point now where I don't even move until I look or make sure that somebody else is blocking before I'll enter an intersection. Is there any kind of plan to address any of that? I know there was a huge uproar over red light cameras, but it just any time you drive through town, you'll see 1, 2, maybe 3 red lights run. Anyway, that's just personal observation.
We can bring it to the attention of the sheriff's department and ask for them to, increase enforcement if possible.
Well, it sure has made me a lot more aware. Light turns green, I just sit there for a while.
Sounds like that's a good step on your part, and we'll take that under advisement.
And I don't recall all the conditions relative to the venue that you raised. all the conditions of approval, but there is a periodic review, I guess, as is with typical conditional use permits. I don't recall what the conditions were relative to the rental of the facility. However, I recall there was a great deal of Q&A going across the floor regarding that, and a considerable amount of assurance shared with this commission on the safety of their operation and hands-on, attentive operation. It's unfortunate that there's activity that rises to that level in any operation, and certainly you can't control everyone's behavior. However, sometimes venues tend to be magnets for that type of thing, and particularly when the owner-operator is renting their space out. We saw it with other operations and the challenges there. So my guess is that the investigation is ongoing, and it'll be a while before Captain Nelson shares results with others in the city here, huh?
Yeah, and we move cautiously on these types of things. The bamboo, certainly an example. We gathered a lot of evidence over a long period of time on that one, and we were pretty easily to establish a pattern of behavior. This one, if it's random, we may step back and take a longer look at it. I don't know.
It's unfortunate. Anytime anyone is injured, whether it's an automobile accident, running a red light, or some idiot firing off a round or two because he's an idiot, or she. Maybe it's a she. It could have been a she, I guess, but the statistics are more likely a he rather than a she, right?
Yes, I agree.
So, all right. We don't have anyone from the public who would like to address us tonight, so I'm not going to go through the dissertation. So, anything else from the members? Then this meeting is adjourned then to the special meeting for agenda review on Monday, March 11th, 2013 at 5:30 p.m. here in the Planning Conference Room at City Hall. And thank you all.
6755.